And what you have to do is you have to find things which are important to your community, things that people really want you to act on. And then you have to work out how to attack that problem and to elevate it to the point where other communities come on board and also say, yep, this is really important to us as well.
Strap yourself in for Keeping It Real with Jack and Rao.
Welcome back, Keepers, to another episode of Keeping It Real with Jack and Rao. But we don't have Jack with us this time. Well, she might join us later when we debrief this. As we are heading into an Australian election, we thought it might be worth speaking to a few people that we think are keeping it real. And so today we have Dr. Monique Ryan is joining us, who's the member for Parliament for Kooyong here in Victoria. So welcome, Monique.
Thanks, Rel. Great to be with you.
And do people call you Mon? I notice your staff calling you Mon.
Yeah, everyone calls me Mon.
Everyone calls you Mon, except for who? Who doesn't call you Mon?
I come from a large Catholic family and we all have a number of different nicknames for each other. Affectionate sorts of things. Obviously, often the genesis of them is lost in the sands of time, but pretty much everyone else calls me Mon.
Yeah, it's like my name, Gabrielle. My younger sister could never pronounce my name and said Raoul, so I've always been called Raoul, except for my mother when I'm in trouble, of course, and my husband when I'm in trouble, of course. That's Gabrielle. Anyway, so Mon, take us back. You used to be a paediatric neurology, head of paediatric neurology for the Royal Children's Hospital. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. How does someone go from that to entering into politics? So take us back why you decided to enter. Was it a bit of a moment that made that, or was it a bit of a slow burn? Tell us how that came about.
It was unexpected in my life. So got to 2021 and I'd been head of the Department of Neurology at the Royal Children's for about 7 years. And during COVID had been acting head of medicine at the Children's for a while, which gave me a taste for how it can be quite satisfying actually when you're in a position where you can change things. So being head of a hospital department, it is a great job, but sometimes you feel like, you can see the problems, but you can't actually affect change on them. And I was possibly, I guess, at a point in my life when I was ready to think about taking something else on. But COVID was difficult. It was a stressful time, and taking a hospital department and a research team through that was challenging. But I also had an experience where my son, who's now 16, but who was then 13, watched a TV show, one of the David Attenborough documentaries that he found really distressing. It was about climate change. He asked me about it and why his dad and I weren't doing more about it, because he could see that it was a real problem. And I didn't have a decent answer for him. So having been a bit frustrated with the Australian government and how it had dealt with COVID, which I thought was suboptimal, and then seeing its utter failure to deal with climate change and its dismissive and, I thought, disrespectful attitude to women as well. Just through 2021, I guess I had a growing frustration with political system at a federal level. So when I saw an ad in The Age at the end of 2021 that said, "Are you the next independent candidate for this federal seat of Kooyong?" I thought, someone should do that. That would be a really good thing to do. And I thought, I'm going to get involved with that. I think someone should hold our local member to account for all the things that I thought that the government was doing not well. And then in the end, that person turned out to be me.
Did you, during that process, thinking, well, that might not be me, but I'll get involved in it, did you have people like, for example, your kids going, "Mum, it should be you"?
Well, in fact, I actually thought someone should do that. And I think Goldstein had just chosen Zoe Daniel, who I didn't know, but I thought Zoe's exactly the sort of person who's good. She's, a well-respected person with a public profile. From what I knew of her, I thought she was a pretty formidable character, and I thought she'd be great at that. That's the sort of person that they'll find and they'll choose for Kooyong as well. So I just thought I should put my hand up just to be involved and to help. But I had a number of friends say, "Come on, Mon, you want to." And in fact, my best friend sent me the ad in the paper and said, "Come on, Mon, go on." And I said, within 2 minutes, I said, "Oh, okay then." But, I put my hand up not thinking that they would choose me. I didn't seriously think that I would be the person that the Voices of Kooyong group would select at that point in time.
It's a similar background story to Zoe too, when her kids were saying, "Mum, if it's not you, who's it going to be to, protect the issues that our kids are going to be dealing with in the future, not us."
Absolutely. And I think quite a few of the community independents have got similar sorts of log cabin stories that our families or our friends basically said, "Look, if you think this is important and you think it's real, you should put your hand up and be involved. And each of us, I think, came to that conclusion eventually. But, with some of us, obviously, it required a bit of consideration because it's not a small thing to move from a private life to a public life.
No, it's not a small thing. And I would imagine there's a lot of people that would be disenfranchised with the current leaders and probably sit in their lounge room going, I could do better than that. I could do, but then very few put their hand up and actually do it. So, and it is a big transition, I'd imagine, going from private to public. For the first time in, my living history, I think we're going into an election that all the latest polls suggest that it's going to be a hung parliament, and that therefore the independents and the minor parties may be playing a significantly role in the future. How can you take the layman through, how does it actually work in practicality with the independents influencing decisions and outcomes?
In this term of parliament, before the last election, people sort of said there might be a hung parliament. There's some thought that might be the case, and it didn't eventuate. And who knows what's going to happen this time around? I think the polls tend to be a bit unreliable in this respect, and it's still, I think, any of the outcomes are still possible. A majority government by the coalition or by Labor, or a hung parliament with the crossbench having the balance of power. So what we've had to do in this term of parliament is learn how to get a result on the things that matter to our community. And it's been a really interesting learning process. Basically, if you're in government, you're a part of a group of people who can wield power. But in any democracy, almost half the people in the parliament are not part of the government. And so we have to work out how to get a result by exerting pressure rather than power. And so that's been a really interesting part of the last 3 years has been working out how to do that and to demonstrate success with that. And what you have to do is you have to find things which are important to your electorate, to your community, things that really people really want you to act on. And then you have to work out how to attack that problem and to elevate it to the point where other communities come on board and also say, yep, this is really important to us as well. And then you have to convince the government, of the fact that there's some political grounds to be gained from taking action on this issue, and that your answer to the problem is a reasonable one. And then if you can get the government to shift and to adopt the change that you want them to adopt, then you have to demonstrate to your community that you were instrumental in that. So all of those things take a little bit of work. The achievement of which I'm most proud in this term of government has been really pushing the government, I think effectively, to take action on HECS reform, which was not an issue at the last federal election, but really came to the fore with the inflation and the indexation of people's HECS debts in the last couple of years. And it was a fascinating process and extraordinary to build a movement with what turned out to be the largest petition in Australian political history, apparently, but also a lot of pressure that we put on the government through media and in other ways, where they actually moved and announced that they were going to put in 3 changes that would save 3 million Australians $3 billion in HECS debt. And it was just extraordinary when we discovered that was going to go through, and that basically we'd had this win. It wasn't the end of the story. There's a lot more to do with HECS, but what we realised was a proof of principle that what we were doing was effective, and that was just a really wonderful thing to do, to be able to demonstrate to my community that their voices had been listened to and that we had been effectively able to act on their behalf.
How do you feel personally when something like that's, like when you sort of get a win like that? How do you feel personally about it when you get the news?
We were really emotional, my team and I, when we discovered that. We were genuinely just beside ourselves with emotion, because it's like, we did this, we've done good. And some of the stories we'd heard from young people, but also from their parents, were a bit harrowing about how their HECS debts were affecting them. It's hard to listen to those things if you feel that you can't make any difference. So the fact that we were able to listen to those stories and then parlay them into something effective and real, and to improve things for those people was a really emotional thing. And I think, if I take nothing else out of the 47th term of Parliament, and I will be taking a lot of things out of the 47th term of Parliament, nothing else, that moment was made it all worthwhile.
Yeah, excellent. So I would agree that there's those moments where you must go, yeah, this is why I did this. But what has surprised you? Like, it's been 3 years now. What surprised you, both good or bad, about being, elected and doing what you do?
I'm probably surprised by the fact that a lot of what happens in Parliament in Canberra is not as well thought through and evidence-based as you would think, and that it's not things get pushed through really quickly, which sometimes are actually ill-advised or poorly thought through. Sometimes that's for political reasons rather than for reasons based on good evidence or independent thought. And that's surprising and disappointing. You see bad decisions, bad legislation sometimes pushed through because the major parties have done a deal at the last minute. And I find that a bit extraordinary. Sometimes you know that these things aren't going to stand up to independent challenge and that they're going to go to court and be struck down. That's frustrating. And I have to say that the other thing I've been surprised by, and perhaps I was naive, but I think many people are in the same position, are surprised by the media. And I think the poverty of independent media or mainstream media coverage in this country is deeply disappointing.
Yeah, yes, I could imagine. Going in, and I guess it has been a pretty big shift for you from, like you said, from private to public. Was there anything you wish you had have known? And would it have changed your decision if you had have known that?
It changed my decision in terms of deciding to take the leap. No, look, I don't think I quite understood how much I would lose my anonymity and how much that would affect not just me, but also my family.
Mm-hmm.
The reality is now that we can't go to the footy without someone saying something. It might be positive, might be negative, but, you know that people recognise you and often want to have a word or tell you what they think about something. And I probably didn't understand the extent to which that would affect my kids as well. And that's been challenging for them at times. And that can be quite hard. But it wouldn't have changed my decision. It's been the most extraordinary 3.5 years, and to be a part of a really important time in Australian political history has been such a privilege. I wouldn't go back and change that at all.
Yeah, I've always thought, I think one of the hardest things being a politician is, like, you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't, that regardless of the decision you made, there'll be some people that love it and will tell you so, and some people that will think you're an idiot and will tell you so.
Yeah. I think, unfortunately, the open window of what's acceptable social discourse in this country has changed in recent years for whatever reason. So people are a bit more forthright, I suspect, now than perhaps they were before. Sometimes people have said things to me and my family members which I found a bit shocking, actually, in terms of, would you really talk to someone like that in the street, someone that you don't know, perhaps someone who's clearly with their children? That can be a bit disappointing and it can be a bit challenging at times, and something that I feel sorry for my kids, actually, that can happen at times and I can't stop it from happening.
Yeah. And I guess because you're in the public, people think that they do know you, and it's almost like they think it's their right to, say those things because you chose to get into the public life. It doesn't make it right, and I'm sure it doesn't make it easier. I'm sure that as you've gone through the last 3 years, you've learnt stuff, you've learned how to do things better. Is there things that stand out that I'm getting better at this, or I would do that differently, or anything like that?
Oh, look, I've made a few mistakes over the last 3.5 years. There's no doubt about that. I don't think there's a human being in the world who wouldn't say that that's the case. One thing I think I have gotten better at is communication. It was really interesting during the last campaign. A couple of times, people who were in the media offered to give me a bit of media training, and and they were really generous with their expertise. It was what they were able to give me, and I was very grateful for it. But I think I have become a better communicator, and I have to say, I look at my peers, the other crossbenchers, all of us who are new to Parliament in 2022. And I look at some of them now and I think, wow, they are amazingly good communicators. And it's such an important part of the job. I think that is something I think that I've probably improved on in the last 3 years, but I think all of us have done so, whether it's just through practice or having to be better at explaining ourselves.
Yeah, well, it's probably a bit of both. I think if you've got some people giving you advice and, you've been doing it pretty much every day since, then you probably are going to get better at it. Hey, I want to get into like some nitty-gritty bits of your job. What are the really, like, I'm not going to say boring bits, but mundane bits, and then what are the more fun bits of your job?
Well, probably the most mundane bit would be the travel. So, if I'd go up to, if sitting weeks, there's 19 or 20 weeks a year in Canberra, and I usually go up on Sunday night because there's a very high chance that a Monday morning flight would be delayed, and they'll usually come back on Thursday night. So, and that can take hours. But, I'm in an incredibly lucky position because it's easiest for those of us who go up from Melbourne or from Sydney or Brisbane. But, some of my friends and colleagues are coming from rural WA or Northern Territory, or even just from Perth. It's a really big slog, and there's a lot of time spent in travel. And I don't think people understand how physically difficult the job is for those people who come from WA just because of the time differences and things. It would be really exhausting and really quite challenging in some ways. So that's probably the most mundane bit, is the travel and, those endless hours when planes are delayed and things like that. The fun bit that I never expected was that when I put my hand up to run as an independent, there was no such thing as a teal. They didn't exist. But what happened in 2022 is extraordinary. All of a sudden, there's other women appeared who had felt the same way and were coming from a similar sort of a position. And so all of a sudden, there were the six of us who were elected and who formed this new group that people end up calling the Teals. I didn't expect to find a group like that. The friendship that we've had together and our ability to work together and to collaborate pragmatically and sensibly has been an absolute gift. I'm told from other independents like Zali and Helen who were there before that it was much harder when it was, just a few of them. And that has been one of the really, really lovely, fun parts of the job. There's a great sadness, actually, when we all finished up a couple of weeks ago in Parliament, because that it's a strange thing. You look around the Parliament, that probably a third of you won't be there again when the Parliament next sits. Some people through choice, but most not through choice. And you look around and, you've done something pretty important together for 3 years, and that's not just the other community independents. I've got lots of friends on both sides of the aisle, and you think, well, we've worked hard together, even if we've had differences of opinion and focus. And most of this group of people will never meet together again in this place. So that's been an absolute gift to be a part of that. It's been such a privilege to be a federal member of Parliament. So few people have that in their lives. Something I'll always be grateful for.
Yeah, and I'd imagine, going in as an independent, you'd be well, I'm here as an independent by myself, and the fact that there were so many independents elected at the last election, it probably was, very grateful that then you sort of could work together and almost just be a support group for each other and friendships, like you've said.
Yeah, we are friends. We don't always agree on things. In fact, we argue quite a lot about different things, and we don't always vote the same way. And people say they're a party. We are not a party. But having said that, the fact that we don't agree with each other sometimes is really, really helpful because, Allegra will say something and I'll challenge her on it, and then she'll push me on something, and you learn through that. It's a very productive sort of a relationship. It's very respectful, and when we walk into the chamber, I won't know how she's going to vote, and she won't know which direction I'm going to go in. So, that, I think it's kind of the best of both worlds in some ways.
Yeah. So I was going to ask you what are some of current challenges you're working on, but, stating the bleeding obvious that we actually go to an election on the 3rd of May. But I guess this is the first time you're running, like holding your seat. So
as an incumbent.
I know it's early on, but does it feel different than the last time when you were?
It feels completely different this time.
Okay. In what way?
Well, I'm an incumbent. I'm not a challenger. I've been there for 3 years. So rather than saying, well, I think I could perhaps do this, my position is this is what I have done and this is what I hope to do. So I'm a known element, I guess. It's also a very different situation politically. Last time we had a government that was on the nose and a prime minister who was hugely unpopular. Now we have a progressive government, which has been disappointing in some ways, but the leadership of the political parties is very different. And then there's all this external stuff. We've got this uncertainty with the international relations and global uncertainty and anxieties that just weren't there 3 years ago, in addition to the fact that it's a different country. We've been through a cost of living crisis and a housing crisis. We're still facing massive climate challenges. The political issues which are front of mind are very different. So it feels utterly different to last time. I don't know, but I suspect it's probably like that every political federal election campaign is very different from the others.
Yeah. How do you maintain your energy? I mean, how do you maintain your energy just naturally, especially those weeks in Canberra? But have you got any specific plans to maintain your energy during the run to the 3rd of May?
Well, it's not always easy. I find that being out in the community actually energizes me. I love talking to people. And so if I'm a bit depressed or tired, my team will just put me out outside a supermarket for an hour so I can just talk to people, because that actually does give me energy. I exercise and try to live reasonably. I don't want to say healthily, but I do. I love swimming. I went for a run. I'll go if I can't go for a swim. I'll go for a run. Went for a run this morning. Yeah, you have to find time for 45 minutes or an hour of some form of exercise 2 or 3 times a week, or I think you'd go a bit crazy. I would go crazy. And I'm lucky to have a family that's very supportive and a good friendship group. But I've always worked hard. I think you can't probably be a good federal parliamentarian unless you're prepared to put a lot of hours into it. But the average person, the average federal parliamentarian has 4.2 years in the House. So most people get less than 2 terms. So you can't take it for granted, and you have to work hard while you're there and take best advantage of the time that you have.
Yeah. How often during your day do you laugh as opposed to swear in frustration or cry in happy or sad tears? Are you having fun most of the time, or most of the time?
Yeah, I love this job.
Right, okay.
I absolutely love it. And there are so many times where you just pinch yourself and think, either because there are all these batshit crazy moments in Australian politics, but also that I still find myself thinking, I can't believe I get to sit in the House at Parliament and I get to do this and I get to do that. And there are some fabulous characters in the place, and I have a team who are very smart and funny people, so they keep me sane. But there are moments of frustration, and there are moments where you just bury your head in the hands and think, oh God. But
how entertaining is question time? What are your thoughts on question time? Like, this is a waste, or it's just for theatre, or
there's a huge amount of time wasted. I love the theatre of politics. I don't think there's as much time given actually to that. In fact, a really good debate or a strong interchange between people, it can be really funny. It can be very entertaining, but there's not that much of that. We need to improve question time. People come into it. You get a bit inured when you've been there for a while. Then people come in and go, oh my God, I can't believe how badly everyone behaves and how much time you waste with these stupid Dorothy Dixes or with these repetitive lines of questioning that aren't going anywhere and which are sometimes very negative. We need to improve it. I think if there is a balance of power, one of the things we will do is we'll change some of the standing orders to hopefully improve the quality of discourse in question time, because a lot of the people who come in just sort of can't believe that we're wasting an hour and a half of parliamentary time every day on stuff which is often not very productive. It could be much better, and we can look at models from the UK and elsewhere which are instructive, I think, in ways of making things a bit more productive, a bit more interesting, and a little bit less of that.
Yeah. I went to question time a couple of years ago with a whole group of professional women, and the overwhelming feeling from that was this behaviour would never, ever, ever be allowed in corporate. No. And the role modelling they're setting for healthy leadership debate is just terrible. And
agree.
I think I agree with you. I think it just needs to raise to a standard, but still have the debate and still have the questions, still have some of the theatre, but just done in a lot more respectful way, I think.
And I think the parties know that. They know that we want to change the crossbench. There's a reason why they call it Prefect's Corner, where we all sit, because there's times they look over and we're going...
Yeah. Oh, well, I think that's a good thing, that you're helping or trying to raise the standard of that. Before I end on my final question, which is about how do you keep it real, is there a question I haven't asked you that you would like me to ask you?
No, I think maybe I think one of the things is, whether other people should do it, and, whether this is a job worth doing. And my answer to that would be absolutely it is. It is a tough job at times. It can be bruising and exhausting. And it's certainly not easy, but it feels very worthwhile. And some of the things we're talking about, like the quality of debate in the House and the nature of relationships between politicians and stuff like that, would only be improved, I think, by having more and more people who come into the political sphere in this country who aren't career politicians, who aren't there only for their own sort of political their own career advancement. So I personally think, and I think this is a reasonable thing to say, that the Parliament is improved when it reflects the people of the country, the demographics, but also the ages and stages, life experiences, and that when it's a bit more representative. And I think that anyone who thinks that they're might be interested in politics should go down that route. Is incredibly rewarding, much more so. The positives much outweigh the negatives, and I think the more people we can get in who've got life experience outside politics, the better it will be for the country.
Yeah, I like that. That's a bit of a recruitment plug. It's like Mon's going, well, I'm not going to do this job forever. But you're so right. I mean, it's like even in corporate, the more diverse the people in the room making the decision, it's going to be a better decision. And, Australia is a pretty diverse country. So I want to end with one question, because this is the Keeping It Real podcast, is what do you do to keep it real, or who keeps you real?
Oh, look, my family keep me real, but certainly my friends and my team. So, it's really important. You live in a bubble where you are a third of the time in Canberra, which is a strange place full of strange people. And then you come back here and you're in this job where, it can be difficult to, I guess it would be possible to just sit in your office and not keep it real. You have to be out and about in your community, talking to people about what matters to them and about their values. And you need good people around you as part of your team who can support you, but also can tell you when it's time to pull your head in.
We all need people like that in our lives. My kids often say, Mum, you're not at work anymore. And it's just like, I know, because you're not listening to me. All right, Mon, thank you very much for your time and your insights to how it all works. And we wish you all the best for the coming weeks leading up to the election. And may we end up with a parliament that delivers for Australians and that we're all proud of. So all the best.
Thanks so much, Val. Appreciate it.
Don't go anywhere, keepers. I promised you Jack would be joining us at some stage, and she is here.
Thank
Welcome,
you, Gabrielle
Jack Phillips. We got this idea from Julia Lewis-Dreyfus' podcast on Wiser Than Me, where she interviews a guest and then she calls up her mum or Zooms her mum and they debrief it. So we thought we would do
I the
that.
mum?
Not that we're... No, not that we're suggesting. No, you're not the mum, mate. You're the nana.
Nana Jack.
But this is a couple of days after the interview I did with Monique Ryan, and Jack's had an opportunity to listen to it, and we thought it would be useful for our keepers to get Jack's take on things. So, Jack, what were the key takeouts for you listening
Well, first
to
of
the
all,
interview?
Raoul, you're a bloody good interviewer. So well done you. And I
you.
really enjoyed learning more about Mon. I've been following the Teals, been following the Independents. I don't know anyone who wouldn't be, because they've really helped change the discourse, and we need that. And I really enjoyed learning a bit more about her, but I love the questions you asked her. But my immediate reaction as she spoke was, her voice. Her voice was deep and resonant, and it had a very much more, I'm not going to say masculine pitch, but a lot deeper than most women speak. And I thought that was fascinating. Yeah. And one of the questions I was keen to ask you was, do you think that her voice or her pitch has changed since she's been doing so much communications?
It's I guess it's not surprising you picked up on that, because you talked about how when you went into the radio, you
Correct.
had to train your voice to be
resonant.
More credible, resonant. Yeah. I don't know. I would suggest not, because the fact that she held some pretty senior roles in, in the medical industry, I would imagine that that's either her natural voice or she has honed it over her years in those leadership roles, as opposed to the last 3 years in politics. But yeah, she's pretty. It is resonant.
It is,
isn't
and
it?
it made me think about a lot of the women I coach. And particularly if they've got a higher pitched voice, and there's nothing wrong with a higher pitched voice, you are who you are, but being very mindful, if you want to be resonant, if you want to cut through, particularly in boardrooms and in meetings, sometimes lowering the pitch of your voice can be really effective. So I noticed that on Mon. I thought she had a beautiful voice. I also thought she had a really lovely pace. It was a very relaxed pace. It wasn't rushed. And again, we talk about this in comms, this importance of being quite poised and coming across as confident, and people that speak at a really good pace do come across as confident versus those that talk very quickly, like me. So I thought...
I actually noticed she was very, very good at, like, I'd ask a question and I felt like she always spoke for the right amount of time. Like, it was never just a short answer, but it was never like, I never felt the need to go, I need to stop her to, because it's going on forever. It's like she just gave the answer, I think, always in just the right amount of time, which very few people do.
Insight. And you're right. She did answer every question and she did it in a way that was efficient, but she gave you context. So again, that was a great one. Hey, I loved her, I guess, is it her mantra and it's an independence mantra that they've obviously figured out, but their whole theme is pressure versus power. Yeah, so their role as independents is to apply pressure in government to get things across the line, so the HEX reform, debt reform was an example of that. And there's been many other things. So these 6 women who stand as independents come together and apply pressure versus power, because they're not big enough and they don't have the numbers for the power. So they've got to apply pressure. And I just thought that's really, really interesting. Did she sort of expand much, or do you have a point of view or a thought on this pressure versus power, Raoul?
No, but you know what I'm immediately thinking? This needs to be a podcast episode, because just when you were saying that, and I hadn't picked up on that, and I guess just logically, like an independent's never going to be prime minister. They're always going to be in a position where they can only pressure and don't have power. But just as you were saying that, I thought that would affect so many of us and our keepers, whether you're in a corporate role and you're in one of the support roles like HR, is pressure versus power. Even as a parent, when you think of parenting, it's, unless your kids are 5,
that's exactly right.
Adult children,
you've lost. That's right. They're often doing their own thing, so that is about pressure or influence. Yeah.
So. Yeah, it is about, it is influence and strategic influence, but I like the concept of that. That's going to be a podcast
I think
episode.
So. The other thing that I really resonated with and it made me really proud to be a female in business and a female leader is that Mon is a great role model for talking very, very frequently about the people that matter in her world, which are her kids and her family. And not shying away from that. She mentioned the word kids, I think 5 or 6 times throughout your interview. And you were asking her a whole range of very political questions, leadership questions, development questions, and it always came back to the people that matter. So leaning into her feminine power and being really proud of the fact she's a mum, and that is something that she really holds dearly, and that she's not prepared to trade off, and she's going to talk about those kids. She also spoke about her emotional responses. The Teals got quite emotional when they did get the HEX debt reform through. And again, not shying away from that. No, we got emotional. Women do get emotional. We're built differently. This is not a bad thing. So leaning into that. But this is great emotion. And yes, it would have been perhaps overwhelming and teary, but it was celebration, and therefore it's a good thing to do. And we can do that safely.
I've actually interviewed her before, and I interviewed her last year, and it was on a panel there was a few other independents, and it was at a conference, and I was the moderator of the panel. And it was sort of shortly, like a few months after Julian Assange had been released, and she was one of the group of there was a group of parliamentarians that went over to sort of try to secure his release. And there was, there was Barnaby Joyce, there was people from Liberal, Labor, there was someone from the Greens. I think there was another there was 5 of them that went over. And I asked her, how did she feel when she heard Julian Assange had got released? And she's told me, she said, I was in a meeting and, her chief of staff came in to interrupt her and thought this must be important and told her. And then I said, how did you really feel at that time? And she went, Beautiful. I cried. I was so emotional. And she goes, we had and she's, credited, there was me and Barnaby Joyce and others. We had put so much effort into this. And she goes, I just cried because it just felt like it was cried for him and it was a relief and it was an overwhelming. So yes, it's
I agree. And she's, such humility, right? She mentioned a number of times how grateful and what a privilege it is to be an independent. They work damn hard. She's foregone anonymity. Her family have been targeted. This is not an easy job. No politician has an easy role. And quite frankly, I don't think they get paid enough for what they have to endure. But I love the fact that she was so humble and so still grateful. I'm privileged. I don't lose sight of the fact that what I get to do, I get to come to Parliament. I get to come into, 19 to 20 weeks sitting times, and I get to represent really important issues that matter to people. And I just thought it was really heartfelt. And again, that humility that women often bring to roles and especially when they're hard and they're okay about that. And I just think that's just so impressive. I really do.
Yeah. What I was impressed about when I decided to ask her right at the end, is there a question I haven't asked you that you want me to ask? And part of me thought, do I ask a politician that? It's like, the typical Dorothy Dixon. And there's an election. They're going to take this opportunity and go, I wish you had asked me why the Liberal and Labor, blah, blah, blah. But what I loved about her is the question she said, ask her, how do we get more people in? And she almost was doing a recruitment for people to say, step into this. More and more people should put their hand up. And, it was almost at the end, she's going, someone please come and take my job.
Yeah, that's right.
But I love that was the question of all the questions, I could ask her. She goes, ask me
so
about
again,
that.
ego is just not there. That is not the agenda here. It is, how do we make sure that we keep this going, this independence, good people who are not career politicians. I loved how she spoke about that. These are people that actually want to see outcomes for community and for for the country, and they're not there for themselves, which was very apparent with her.
Yeah. And they're not there for the power either, because
they don't have the power.
None of them will ever be prime minister, but they're there to
exactly right.
Pressure
and to
persuade
get things
and
done.
Influence. Yeah.
Finally, because we could talk about this for a long time, and we'll continue talking about this over a glass of Wild Duck Creek, I know now. But in the meantime, I'd like to perhaps wrap this up by saying the other thing that really stood out for me was she spoke about quality and improvement at least 3 or 4 times. The quality of debate needs to improve in question time. We need to improve the discourse. People feel that they can just come up and say anything to anyone, and that's not appropriate. And I just thought, again, this real focus on how do we as a society, as a nation, get better. And I love that. And I thought that again was very very authentic.
Yeah, no, I agree. Okay, well, is there a question I haven't asked you that you would like me to ask you, Jack?
My question is, are we going to do more of these, Raoul?
I think we might. It's not, we'll find people that we think would be valuable for our keepers. Worthy.
Well, the ones that are authentic, keeping it real. Mon was a great example. So I think we might pepper a few of these in our podcast episodes so that, again, our keepers are always being kept, entertained and informed, but also learning. And that's the entire point of this.
Yeah.
So well done, you.
Definitely. And, Yes, thank you, Jack, and thank you for your insights. And keepers, if you did, like if you're sitting there going, yeah, that was interesting, I would like to, and we're not just talking about interviewing politicians, we're interviewing other people, then let us know and we will potentially do a few more of these. As usual, if this has been of value, like, share, rate, tell your friends. And
Keep on being a keeper.
We keep on keeping it real.
Bye.
See you next time. Bye.
You've been listening to another episode of Keeping It Real with Jack and Raoul. If you like what you've heard, don't forget to tell others about it and give a 5-star review. They may seem confident, but they really are sensitive 5-star needy souls. Yeah, right. Keeping It Real, created by Jack Phillips and Gabriel Dolan. Produced by Keelan Ferrari Brown. And this really real voiceover, spoken by Richard Phillips.